Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. It's really good to be here. As Steve said, this is my third time. They say that every good preacher has 2 decent sermons in him. We'll find out. No, really wonderful to be back and to be chatting on this series, looking at the eyewitness accounts of Jesus. And we've got a good passage this morning. I hope you enjoy looking at it. I'm sure some of you will have encountered it a few times before. And it's a passage, it's a story that Jesus tells. And the wonderful thing about reading these stories is that as I read them, although they're 2,000 years old by now, there's a lot in them and I think, oh, I get that. I relate to that. And I think one of Jesus' most amazing talents as a storyteller is to tell stories that still are stories. So I'm going to read this from Luke 15, starting at chapter 1, verse 1. The tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to him. But the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So to them he addressed this parable. "What man among you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them," I know that in Suffolk we've got a lot of farmers, so you're going to like this one, "having 100 sheep and losing one of them would not leave the 99 in the desert and go after the lost one till he finds it. When he does find it, he sets it on his shoulders with great joy, and upon his arrival home, he calls together his friends and neighbors and says, 'Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you, in just the same way, there'll be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than the 99 righteous who have no need for repentance. Or the woman, having 10 coins, losing one, would not light a lamp and sweep the house, searching carefully till she finds it. When she does find it, she calls together her friends and neighbors and says to them, 'Rejoice with me, because I found the coin that I lost.' In just the same way, I tell you, there will be rejoicing among the angels over one sinner who repents." I don't know how you divvy up who does what talk at the Forge here. I don't know if it's just like a roulette thing and you spin it round, or if it's like some kind of draft system where people are allowed to vote on which one. I like to think when it came to this one, they said, "Oh, maybe we should get a guest speaker in for one of these talks." I like to think Ben Laskew, I've known a long time, chirped up and is like, "I've got just the man for this talk." They probably said, "Oh, Ben, is that because you've heard him speak on it? He's got some profound insights." He'd say, "No. I just know someone who is always lost." I got lost on the school run the other day. I've done the school run a lot of times, and I live in a very small village. So fortunately, I'm just aware that my village just has a triangle in it of 2.5 kilometres, so I just kept walking around it until I made my way home. I specifically didn't apply to any London universities because I knew I would get lost, and then that would be it. I'd just wander for years in London, not knowing where my wife used to think it was a joke. She thought, there is no one who has got zero sense of direction. I think you make this up for comic effect. So one day she gave me a challenge. Bearing in mind I've lived in the same town of Colchester pretty much my whole life, and we were going to a friend's house we've been to many times before, and she said, "You're not allowed to use your phone for directions this time. I'm not going to tell you where to go. You're going to drive us to our friend's house." Not only did I get the wrong street, I went to the wrong side of Colchester. Colchester's quite big, but the worst thing was that I thought I'd arrived. And I was so excited. And I parked up, and like a little child on Christmas, I was like, "I've done it." And then she said, no, we have very much... I know what it's like to get lost. And I think that's why I relate to stories like this, and maybe why Jesus tells. And I think it's interesting in these first 2 stories Jesus tells, that there are different reasons and ways we get lost. And some of us this morning, we or people we know, we feel lost because we've fallen through the cracks, like a lost coin. And it wasn't your fault, and it was you just fell through the cracks in society or the system or your friendship group. You're like the lost coin. And the wonderful thing about the story that we just read is Jesus says we worship a God who, when you feel like you have fallen through the cracks, there's still someone looking for you. When no one else seems to care, there is a God who chases after you with his reckless love and looks for some of us. I think I'm more like the sheep. Because I'm not like deliberately getting lost. I just get lost in my own little world, and then I just look around and think, "Oh, how did I..." The other day, I just found myself under the stairs. I don't know why. I was just, "What? Does anyone do this?" Just like, 3 of you do. Good. Just like, what on earth am I doing here? And I feel that maybe Jesus tells this story because some of us, or people we know, we look around our life And maybe it's pushing the metaphor too far, but it's like our life is like under the stairs. We're just like, how on earth did I get here? Like, I wasn't really intending to end. And maybe Jesus tells the story of the sheep for those of us who have just wandered. We just disconnected for a bit, and the flock went that way, and then we just woke up and looked around and thought, how on earth did I end up here? And our life feels a bit under the stairsy. Jesus tells the story because he says that when we feel like that, when we feel disconnected, when we feel a bit lost, when we feel that we've just missed the call a bit to go left and we've all gone right, when we feel like that, there's a God who looks for us. There's a God who's chasing after us. There is a love that does not rest until it finds you. There is a God who is still looking and leaving the 99 to look for you, even when you feel a little bit under the stairs. There's a love that chases you, that looks for you, and celebrates when you're found. And then Jesus tells the next parable. And I think it's the best one. I think it's the best one out of the three. I think it's probably his best parable all round, to be honest. I don't know if he ever did like an audible best of hits. I feel that this one is making it onto there of Jesus' stories. It's a story that you may have heard lots of times before, but for me it's a story I reckon that has saved my faith. And even if you've heard it hundreds of times, or maybe this is your first time, I do hope that as we look at it this morning, there's something in it that catches your attention again. I hope that you get something out of it in the same way I have over the last couple of weeks, as I've been rereading the story of the lost sons. Verse 11, a man had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, "Father, give me the share of your estate that should come to me." So the father divided the property between them. Inheritance is stressful. Working out who gets what is stressful. When someone passes away and there's a will and you've got to work out who's getting one, there's often arguments. But in this day, this carries added weight. Because if we read it carefully, the man divides the property. But these are farming folk. It's not so much that the land belongs to the people as much as the people belong to the land. You can read this as the man divided the property. You can also read it as the man divided his life. Because this isn't just to take out your ISA and hand over the bank account details and divvy up who gets the TV. This is splitting the property in 2. Apparently this was a divorced couple in the Philippines. I don't know who got this bit and who had to... Anyway. There's this sense as we read the passage of the pain that the father feels. This isn't just inconvenient, this is deeply embarrassing. You're having to sell the land in order to give it to your upstart young kid who's demanded one day that you have the land. The son basically saying, "I wish you were dead." And the father tears up his land, divides his life, carves himself in 2, and gives his son what he wants. Verse 13, after a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck that country and he found himself in dire need. Jesus, the master storyteller, is whipping up a sense of indignation in the crowd. So there's this kid who's come along and demanded the land. This poor father has had to sell this land that has been in his family for generations to give the son what he wants, only for him to then waste it, to frit it away on something that doesn't really last. And the son goes off and squanders it. All of those years of toil and investment and prudent saving gone. Just for this immature young man's holiday. Verse 15, the son. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens who sent him to his farm and tended to the pigs. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the pigs fed, but nobody gave him any. Man, this is low. He's taken his father's land, he's wasted his money, and then now he's living with the pigs. In this context, many of you will know that within a Jewish religion, the pigs are not to be touched. Bacon sandwiches are not high up on the menu in Israel. And the idea of this person leaving the homeland, leaving his culture, leaving his father, leaving his religion, and ending up working with the pigs, it doesn't get much worse than that. And you can hear the intake of breath in the crowd as they feel like, well, this is truly disgusting. There is nowhere lower this guy can go. Verse 17, coming to his senses, he thought, how many of my father's hired workers have got more than enough food to eat? But here I am dying from hunger. I'll get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would one of your hired workers. So he got up, went to his father. I was actually meant to preach here a couple of weeks ago, and then very inconveniently, my daughter was born. Which was very exciting. It was very exciting. But it did mean that, unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here when I was meant to be speaking on wrestling with God. Some of you might have been here and heard Steve's talk on that, which I listened to, and I thought was very good, Steve. And my one was also fine, but I thought it was good. And the thing I was going to say when I was going to speak on that, the wrestling with God, was that so often our times of wrestling with God are kind of when we're at our lowest point. When we're in amongst the pigs. When it's all gone wrong. No one wrestles with God when it's good, do they? No, when you're having a good time and everything's going well and there's more money than month and the kids aren't arguing. No, we wrestle with God when the wheels have come off. When things are going wrong. And I was reading this story and I was like, this story highlights the things can go wrong in lots of ways. So this younger son, as he's in with the pigs, he looks around at his life, and quite frankly, he's to blame for a lot of it. He's made some bad decisions. And sometimes I look at my life where it's not going so well, and I have to hold my hands up and say, to be fair, that's a lot of that's on me. A lot of that's on me. I'm like the younger son. I've made some bad choices. I've demanded things that I shouldn't have demanded of. I've made choices I shouldn't have made, and here I am dealing with the consequences. It's also a bit of the son's story that isn't his fault. We read that there was a famine in the land. That wasn't his fault. And sometimes in life, we're going through life, and there's just a famine. Just economic downturn that was nothing to do with us, and suddenly we're feeling the consequences. We also read that the people around didn't help him. They should have done. He'd been there, getting the rounds in when he had some money, making friends, but these friends disappeared pretty quickly when the money went. Sometimes we're in a mess because of our decisions, like the younger son wishing his son dead. Sometimes we're in a mess because of other people's decisions and things people have inflicted on us, like the friends who abandoned him or the people who didn't help him. Sometimes we're in a mess just because there's a famine. Nothing anyone could do. Sometimes you just dealt the wrong hand. And one thing I was going to say when I was talking about wrestling with God was so often in life, we don't get a choice over the hand that's dealt us. But we always get a choice on how we play it. There's a moment in the story where the younger son has made terrible decisions and bad things have happened to him and people have been mean to him. But he makes one good decision, and that's to change his direction to home. Because when we find ourselves in a bad place, your position is less important than your direction. There's a moment where the younger son decides to recalibrate his projection of his life. And instead of wallowing with the pigs, he's going to set himself for home. There is a moment where he decides for the first time to make a good decision with a bad hand he's been dealt. Often in life we don't get a choice of what we're dealt, but we always get a choice on how to play it. In his place of desperation, he gets up and he goes back to his father while he was still a long way off. And this is the bit of the story that always gets me. No matter how many times I've read it, it always makes me a little bit emotional. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him, and was filled with compassion. And he ran to his son, embraced him and kissed him. His son said to him, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer deserve to be called your son." But before we can even finish the excuse, verse 22, but his father ordered his servants, "Quickly, bring the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring around his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fattened calf and slaughter it, and we will celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead, and he has come to life again. He was lost and has been found," and the celebration began. When we feel there is nowhere lower to go, when we feel that we are eating with the pigs, if we can make one step towards home, if we can recalibrate our direction, not even our position, but if we can just change the way we're facing towards God, we encounter a God who runs towards us. My wedding was a really good day. It was really good. Ben Lasky, as I say, I've known a long time, he was there singing, trying not to get stung by the bees. There was a little bee's nest next to his head, which is quite funny. It was great. There were trumpets, there was a rapper, there was a groom's cake, because I insisted on having a chocolate cake just for me. It was a good day. But I'll tell you what, it wasn't the day I knew I was loved by my wife the most. It wasn't. Because, I'm not the most handsome man, but I looked pretty good. I'd scrubbed up. I'd made a lot of effort to make sure that for that one day, that was the best I could look. And so, again, I don't want to sound big-headed, but I wasn't surprised when she said "I do." Why wouldn't you? That wasn't the moment I knew my wife loved me the most. You might have friends or family or spouse. When was the time you knew that they loved you the most? Probably wasn't when you looked your best. No. The day I knew my wife loved me the most was when I was sick. When I couldn't walk up the stairs without having to lie down for about 3 days. My heart had some issues, which meant that I was completely useless, and I spent most of my time watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I offered nothing. And we had a small child who needed nappy changing and a lot of attention. And I was useless. And yet she still loved me. That's when I knew my wife loved me. Or another time where, you make a mistake. Sometimes in a relationship, it's like, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, let's all apologize. Yeah, it wasn't one of those times. It's one of the times it was very much on me. Very much a time where you have to sit down and look them in the eye and be like, I am just really sorry. I've got no excuse. I'm sorry. It's on me. And then she looked at me and still said she loved me. That's when I knew she loved me. We can all encounter the grace of God. But there is a depth of grace that is experienced most acutely by those of us who feel most lost. There is a depth of love that we can experience from God, which is most acutely felt. In that moment, we know we offer God nothing. In those times where we have slummed it with the pigs, where we have made bad choice after bad choice after bad choice. The seasons in my life where I've rolled the stone in front of Jesus and said, "Stay in there, I'd rather you were dead," and walked away. The times in my life where I have got nothing to offer God, yet in my desperation and out of more self-preservation than anything else, I have elected to turn just a bit back towards home. And in that moment of desperation when I have got nothing and I see a God who runs to me, that's when I knew the depth of grace. I don't know if you feel like that this morning. I sincerely hope you don't. But I'll say it again, in case there is one out of 100 who feels that disconnect from God, who feels like you have made bad choice after bad choice, who feels like you are slumming it with the pigs. Turn around. Because as you make that first step towards home, you find a God who runs and puts his arm around you and says, "Welcome home. You are loved exactly as you are." Jesus doesn't finish the story there, because there were two lost brothers. And if I'm honest, I'm both of them. Because sometimes I'm the younger brother running home, knowing I've messed up, knowing I've got nothing to offer God, and finding the grace and love of a God who embraces me and says, welcome home. But I began this chapter, verse 1, the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to him. No wonder when he tells stories like this. But the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So to them he addressed this parable. You see, for them, it was always a big deal of who was in and who was out. Always a big deal. I did a theology master's a couple of years back, and I read pages and pages and pages of articles of grown adults arguing over whether a certain group of people could strictly be called evangelical because they had a different view on the nature of time. I'm not making this up. Intelligent people wasted their time on that. Why? Because they really cared who was in and who was out. They would spend pages arguing over whether or not so-and-so was allowed to be called an evangelical or not. They would draw lines and be like, well, we are in and we are out. I remember speaking to a minister once. He had some very strong opinions about a particular issue. Very strong. And I remember talking to him over a drink once, and he was like, well, the thing is, those people, they're just idiots. People who don't agree, they're just idiots. And then I did ask him, didn't you used to think like that? He had to be like, well, yes, I did. And I said, well, how did you used to view how you currently think? And he was like, well, I suppose I used to think I was an idiot. This man had just drawn a nice circle around him and been like, everyone in here is good and everyone out there is an idiot. And then he's moved and drawn a circle over here and decided, well, everyone in here is good. We'd never do that, would we? Never get obsessed over who was in and who was out. In Jesus' day, you had to eat the right thing or you were out. You had to wear the right clothes or you were out. You had to look the right way or you were out. You had to be born into the right family or you were out. I can do that. I invigilate a lot of exams. It's so boring. Like, properly dull. And so you have to play games. Otherwise, you have to. You can play Pac-Man, that's a good one. You're only allowed to walk, but obviously the nature of the desks mean that you're allowed to walk like this, and then you turn. Have to try and catch the other invigilator, that's a good one. I have been known to walk into an exam. You know, sometimes people walk in with a bit of paper and like hushed tones at the front as though there's an important announcement. I do that, and then on the paper it would say, who's going to prison first? And then the other invigilator looks at me, and then they nod. Then you have to walk slowly around the room. And you have to stand just behind. Often it's the same kid. Some of you are now realizing why the invigilator always used to stand next to you. The trouble is, that light-hearted bit of judgmentalism can still grow. It sometimes comes with people watching, doesn't it? Sitting in a coffee shop, watching people go past. And if we're not careful, the thing in our mind can become quite negative. No, too fat, too thin. They're a bit stingy. Look at the way they behave with their kids. Never let my kids do that. If we're not careful, I find it very interesting that in Genesis, Adam and Eve are given a choice of two trees. The choice of the knowledge of good and evil, or the tree of life. My friends, we get to choose which tree we eat from every day. Do you choose to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, where we put ourselves in the position of God? They're in, they're out. They're good, they're bad. They're clean, they're unclean. That was what Pharisees did for a living, deciding who was in and who was out, and who was good and who was bad, and who was clean and who was unclean. This can grow in our minds. We elevate our position to a position of God, deciding what's good and what's evil. But no, we can choose to eat from the other tree, a tree of life, a tree of welcome. And I find it so sad that so often people come to church yearning and longing for the warm embrace of a father who runs to them, but instead find the cold shoulder of the elder sibling who stands outside the party and refuses to go in. He became angry, it says in verse 18, and he refused to enter the house. The father came and pleaded with him. His father said, "Look, all these years I've served you, and not once did I disobey your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat to feast on with my friends. But when your son who returns has swallowed up your property with prostitutes, for him you slaughter the fatted calf." The father said, "My son, you are here with me always. Everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found." We have a temptation to be like the elder brother. And so often I am, standing on my own self-importance, looking down on the people around me, deciding who is in and who is out, and who is clean and who is not. But both sons were lost. Both sons were lost. Both of them were disconnected from their father. We have a choice which tree we eat from. Whether we eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, judgmentally deciding who is in and who is out, or we can choose to eat from a tree of life that gives love and grace and mercy to others because we have experienced that love and grace and mercy first. I find it fascinating the way we take communion, because I feel that communion could be done at home in a sense. You get a little bit of wine, a little bit of bread, you take it, you reflect, you pray. But we don't take it at home alone. We take it with people. It says right at the start of this chapter, the thing the Pharisees got so annoyed at were the fact that Jesus would eat and drink with these dirty people. But Jesus reframes it. He's not eating and drinking with dirty people. He is celebrating with lost people who have become found. Karl Barth says that one of the best things about church is it forces us to spend time with those who are different from us. And sometimes on a Sunday we look around and think, oh, these people are very different. Sometimes we don't use the word different. But that's the beauty of it. That's the thing that calls us to mercy rather than sacrifice. It's the thing that calls us away from judgmentalism. It's the thing that calls us away from the identity and the characteristics of the elder brother. It's the thing that calls us away from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil towards a tree of life, because we have received grace. We've all been that younger son who has run back to God, who has walked back to God and found a God who runs to us. We've all experienced that grace and embrace of a father when we have offered nothing. Yeah, if you're anything like me, too often, I'm also the elder brother, criticizing those who sin differently to me, criticizing those who look lost in a different way to me, as though my version of lost was better than theirs. The reason I like communion is because it forces us to eat and drink together, because we are all one at the foot of the cross. We all come to the table as one body, as we share in his. We come to the table as equals, as lost people looking for grace, and knowing that we've found a place of home. Let's pray. God, I pray for anyone this morning who feels acutely that they are lost, that they're a long way from home. I pray that right now they would experience the depth of your love that is reckless in its pursuit of us, that does not stop, does not slow down, but seeks until we are found. Pray for anyone who feels like they've made bad choice after bad choice. I pray now they would experience something of an embrace from you. A costly, loving embrace that tells us we are loved exactly where we are. God, I'm sorry for the times I've been like an elder brother, refusing to join the party because I was bitter at the grace extended to others. Sorry for the times I've eaten from the wrong tree, judging others just because I think they're lost in a different way to me. God, I ask that you would take away our pride. You would remind us that we are one family, that we are united in our need for your grace and gratitude for your love. Amen.